Good evening, everyone. My name is Benjamin Lewis, and I'll be your professor for Psychology 101. Get ready to explore the depths of the human mind. We're going to start our course with Introduction to Classical Conditioning. No introductory psych course would be complete without dealing with this topic. I'll first talk about the man who discovered classical conditioning, Ivan Pavlov, and how he discovered it. I'll then talk about what classical conditioning is. Lastly, I'll provide some everyday examples of classical conditioning. Ivan Pavlov was born in 1849 in a small Russian village. In 1870, he walked hundreds of miles across Russia to enroll in St. Petersburg University as a student of digestion. Now, I know as a student of physiology. He was primarily interested in the physiology of digestion, and he had developed many surgical techniques for measuring salivary processes in dogs. He cut the cheeks of his dogs and connected tubes of them, which then blew down the tube and then went into a drain so he could analyze it. He found that salivation was an automatic reflexive response to food coming into contact with the mouth. After several sessions, Pavlov noticed that the dogs salivated at other times that didn't involve food. This fascinated Pavlov due to his belief that behavior follows laws. If salivation is a reflexive response, lawfully elicited by very specific stimuli such as food to the mouth, then why would it suddenly occur in the absence of these stimuli? And this question led Pavlov to discover classical conditioning. So what is classical conditioning? In simple terms, classical conditioning is a reaction to a stimulus that's caused by an association with another stimulus. Pavlov's dogs would salivate whenever the experimenter went into the room because the dogs thought that they're going to get food when the experimenter came in. Pavlov also paired the food with a tone, and the dogs would salivate whenever they just hear the tone by itself. And there are four technical terms involved with classical conditioning. The salivation elicited by the food is called the unconditioned response, UR, because it requires no training to elicit this response. The salivation to the tone is called a conditioned response, CR, as it requires training to elicit the response. The food was an unconditioned stimulus, US, for salivation, as it is a stimulus that elicits a response without training. Finally, the tone was a conditioned stimulus, CS, as it is a stimulus that elicits a response through training. So, classical conditioning results in the repeated pairing of a CS with a US, which leads to increased responding to the CS. And there is another term that's pretty important in classical conditioning, and that is extinction. Extinction occurs when a CS is presented many times without the US, and this leads to a decrease in responding to the CS. And I'll now go over some examples of classical conditioning in everyday life. One word we hear a lot in today's world is recession. Seeing a news report that presents doom and gloom about the economy can lead to thoughts of poverty, which then could lead to an adverse emotional reaction. Seeing one news report may just produce mild annoyance, while seeing 20 of them may produce an emotional reaction strong enough to get a person to want to smash their TV. Another everyday process that is strongly influenced by classical conditioning is sexual arousal. I like women with big booties, and seeing one gets me quite excited. And I pair a woman with a big booty and tight pants, and I'm in heaven. Another example of a classically conditioned process is food aversion. When my dad was a kid, he bit into a Bounty chocolate bar and it had maggots in it. And whenever he thinks of Bounty chocolate bars, he can't help but feel sick. This concludes our first lecture. I have talked about Ivan Pavlov, how he discovered classical conditioning. I have talked about what classical conditioning is, and I have also provided some everyday everyday examples of classical conditioning. You now have the tools to understand how classical conditioning affects you and others each and every day. I look forward to having a fun and educational school year with you all.